What is up, guys? We are just going to get straight into it today, and in today's video we are going to discuss setting up my program, right? So I'm going to make the presumption that you've watched the last few videos, because otherwise this really won't make sense. So if not, pause the video now, go back, watch those videos, and then come back to this video, right? So I presume you've done that. Now, with this, when we're setting up a program, regardless of the goal, we actually have to sit down and think things through, right? You can just go online, you can type in 4-day per week training program, 5-day per week training program, whatever else, right? And you'll get a program, but it won't be tailored to your specific needs, your specific goals. And that's fine for a lot of people. You know, you might have very generalized goals, very, moderate, whatever, goals in mind, right? And you finding a generalized program could be quite effective for you for at least some period of time, right? But as we've been discussing on this vlog series, I have very specific goals. So I want to take you through how we design things up for those specific goals. Now, we do have to take into account that my goals, a lot of them are, what would we say, kind of antagonistic to each other. Now, some of them are supportive of each other, but some of them are not exactly supportive of each other. So when I'm designing this stuff, I'm effectively trying to, what's often called ride two horses with one ass, right? So I'm trying to get multiple adaptations at the same time. You would probably be better off working on singular adaptations at a singular point in time, right? And that'll become apparent as we go through this. You'll see that I'm somewhat making compromises here and there, and I could make more compromises, but I'm making compromises by not focusing on a specific goal, right? So just to quickly recap, up the top here, we just have the goals. So these are somewhat in the order of priority here. We have fat loss is the first goal that I have. Now that's obviously, we're in a fat loss phase here. So I'm keeping the goal. I'm keeping that in mind that I do have somewhat reduced recovery capacity here because I don't have calories to support the training, to support, energy homeostasis, right? Now, as I'm saying just in the notes here, I'm not looking to get excessively lean. I'm just looking to tidy things up, get into a relatively good position, because the longer term goal is to gain weight. It is to start putting on more and more muscle. So I'm just looking to tidy things up, put myself into a good position, feel good about my physique, about how I'm looking. As we discussed previously, I had been gaining for a year. So this is a quick, it was going to be an initial 8-week tidy up, but I've actually extended it to 16 weeks, which generally I don't recommend doing, but it was going quite nicely. And I kind of wanted to just get a little bit leaner. I hadn't been that lean, or this lean, I should say, in a little bit, in a while anyway, right? And it's going quite easy, so I'm going to continue with it, right? Now, so again, fat loss is the goal. We have to keep that in mind. Second goal is improving my fitness. Now, for me specifically, I'm looking to improve my aerobic fitness. My anaerobic fitness is good, but what I really want to dial in on is my aerobic fitness, right? And the reason for that is related to the fat loss, right? It's just, easy to burn quite a lot of calories by doing aerobic training. It's fairly low intensity. It doesn't require a lot of recovery capacity, capabilities. So cool, we can slot that in very nicely into a fat loss phase. It also, again, just burns calories, contributes to the fat loss, right? But specifically to my other training, as I've discussed before, I do have some specific goals in terms of I want to go on a hike later on in the year. We'll talk about that in a future video. So I want to be really fit for that. And then also I want to improve my recovery between rounds, right? Or even in rounds of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? So that's mainly driven by the aerobic system. And then I also have some health metrics that I want to really improve in terms of my cardiac function, right? So we're really focusing in on the aerobic system. Now, a lot of people will do a lot of different types of cardiovascular training throughout the week, and that's fine, especially if you are untrained. That'll get you to a decent level of aerobic fitness, anaerobic fitness, etc., right? But if we're really looking to pinpoint a specific adaptation, you're better off just focusing on that singular adaptation, right? So you'll notice throughout the training program, I'm not doing a load of anaerobic training and aerobic training and different types of training. I'm just sticking to aerobic training, right? Now, this is somewhat complicated by the fact that, I do jiu-jitsu training, and some of that training does tap into, the anaerobic pathways. So I have to contend with that, But having said that, we're going to spend the vast majority of our training time here in this aerobic zone, or at least my general physical preparedness training time in that kind of aerobic zone, right? So that's improving the fitness. Again, the other goal that I have is I want to improve my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? So to do that, I have to ensure that I fuel correctly for it and then recover from the training sessions, right? So we have to make sure that the diet, which I'll talk about in a future video, is supportive of my goals, right? And then I also actually have to get to class. That is one of the biggest things, because while I'm designing this training program with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in mind, if I'm doing a lot of training in the gym that takes away from my ability to train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, then I'm not going to maximize my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training, right? So that has to be kept in mind, that I'm focusing on that, and all the other stuff has to be within the recovery capacity that I have available outside of that, right? So for you might be able to train harder, be able to train more, etc., but you might not have the same goals that I do. And this is the same for everyone you talk to in the gym. You might not have the exact same goals as them. So as a result of that, you have to be aware that there are multiple goals available to us all, and we have to keep that in mind, right? And then the final thing is, during this phase at least of my training, I'm basically just trying to maintain muscle and strength. I'm looking to, if I can build a little bit of muscle, happy days. If I can get a little bit of stronger, happy days. But I'm not really focusing on really trying to progress my muscle and strength, because I just don't have the recovery capacity for that, and then I also don't have the fueling for that. You're not going to build excessive amounts of strength and muscle if you're not eating at least at calorie maintenance, right? And I'm not currently, right? So we have to be cognizant of what we have going on outside of our this is the perfect training program, right? Yeah, it could be the perfect training program, but if you're not recovering, you're not eating enough, you're not sleeping, you're not looking after your stress management, you're not doing all these other things, the perfect program is irrelevant, because it's not perfect for you, because you do not have your life set up to facilitate that kind of training or support that kind of training, right? So with that in mind, let's just move over to this kind of training matrix that we have here now. So there's a few things on this that I want you to be aware of. So this is my kind of schedule throughout the day, and this is something that I encourage a lot of my clients to do. Now, sometimes it's, it doesn't really matter if you're training 3 days per week. You don't need to be overly complex with your overall training matrix, like when you're going to train, etc. But if you have a few different training sessions throughout the week, maybe different activities, like myself, I have a sporting endeavor that I'm doing. You might have multiple sporting endeavors. Like a few of my clients, they might do, something like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and basketball, for example. And we have to really focus on recovery. We have to really think out, okay, this is when you're going to be more recovered, so this is what we're going to do on this day, versus this is when you're going to be less recovered, so this is what we're going to do on this day, right? So if you have multiple things going on, you have to pay attention to your recovery capacity more and more, right? So for me, for example, I'm doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu 4 days per week. That's what I've allotted myself to. That's what fits my schedule with everything else that I have going on, business, social life, etc., right? And then also I have time to allocate to the gym 4 days per week. Well, technically 5. I also do some cardio, right? And that works out as, Monday I'm doing a lower body training session in the morning, right? And then in the evening I'm doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, in my club, that's generally a class of just rounds, like it's a competition class, and we basically just do 3 to 7 minute rounds until the hour is over. Obviously we do warm up, etc., right? So that day is actually quite intensive in terms of my overall calorie expenditure, because you're doing rounds, you're pushing yourself, right? So that's why I have on the Sunday, which obviously comes before Monday, it's a full day off. So I want to be fully recovered for that, sets the tone for the week as well, and it puts me in a good position for both those endeavors, my lower body training and then my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training. Now, I also have a generalized 7,500 step goal for that day, and I usually hit this just going through my day-to-day activities. Now, if I was really looking at, okay, man, the fat loss is not happening as quickly as I wanted it to, and maybe I don't want to lower calories anymore, I could easily manipulate the number of steps that I do throughout the day. I could just add in an extra, 10-minute walk, 15-minute walk, something like that throughout the day, and just start racking up some extra calorie burn and some extra steps, right? So we have to be aware of all these different things. And this is especially true when we're talking about fat loss phases. If we don't, in some way keep track of where our steps are at, it's very easy to see them really drop down low, because you get all these metabolic adaptations to dieting. So if you're in a deficit, you're eating fewer calories than you ideally want to be, you're going to start noticing that your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, so all these like movements, walking around, all these different things, they start to go down. And that's adaptive. You actually do want that in the survival setting, but in the context of a fat loss diet, it's not exactly ideal, right? So we need to be aware of this. We need to keep track of this and make sure that they don't go below a point where, you basically end up at maintenance because your activity is so low, right? So that's the Monday. The Tuesday, relatively similar. I'm training in the morning. This time I'm doing an upper body training session. Then in the evening, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training. And then again, I have that 7,500 step goal, right? That Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training session is a 90-minute session, but it's very technical focused. There's only about 20 minutes of rounds in that, and they're usually not quite as intense, right? And then I have Wednesday off. Now, I could, and I have previously in the past, train straight through. I've done like 6 days in a row training, but I noticed that for me, at least, my heart rate variability and other recovery metrics are just not as good as when I take an actual day off here, right? So for me, I could train more and still feel good. I could still see progression in the gym or whatever, but I'm not optimizing my recovery capacities, right? And also, I want to have this day off from training because mentally, at least for me, I feel way more switched on when I have a break from training, if I'm not training every single day, right? Because some people, they do find, they need to train every single day to really put themselves into a good position. But for me, I actually find that if I know, I have to train the next day and I have to train the next day and I have to train the next day, I end up not training as hard, right? Because I feel like I have to save my energy for the next training session, right? So we have to be aware of that, and that's a psychological thing as well as somewhat of a physical thing. And again, when you're training someone, if you're coaching someone, you have to be aware of these things. Now, of course, look, some people's schedules just mean that they have to train 4 days in a row or whatever. That's not the case here for me, so I can have a little bit more leeway in terms of how I set up my training, right? Now, again, Wednesday is a day off. All I do on that day, I basically just work all day. I have a lot more time because I'm not training twice a day on that Wednesday, so I do a lot more work, right? I basically, sit down, do a lot more work just throughout the day, and all I'm really doing activity-wise is when I wake up in the morning, I go for a walk, and then in the afternoon, I'll go for another walk. And then in the evening, whatever happens, if I go out for a meal or I do whatever, cool, I'll add a little bit extra activity in by virtue of going out and doing something, but it's not really like formalized activity. And basically the Thursday and the Friday, same thing again. We've got lower body and upper body in terms of the resistance training, and then we've got Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu twice, right? Now that Thursday session, it's basically like the Tuesday session again, not too intensive, but it is 90 minutes long, so it does take a bit of recovery capacity for that. And then we have the Friday session, which I just go to a beginner class in that session, the fundamentals class, and just really work on those fundamentals. So that is a little bit easier of a day, right? So you can see my days are basically going so far. It's like a hard day, a slightly easier day, easy day, hard day, easier day, so a moderate day. And then on the Saturday, we've got some cardio. And this, I just do 60 to 90 minutes of cardio, but I'll come to that in a second, right? And again, on that, I don't have any, in the evening training, and all I'm focusing on is getting my steps. Now, that's a very easy way or an easy day to get my steps because I let my steps, the steps that I get doing my cardio, I let that contribute. So if I wanted to really go, look, we have to be very specific with how much, is non-exercise activity thermogenesis versus how much is actually set aside exercise stuff. I could separate those two and be like, right, I have to get 7,500 on top of whatever I get from cardio. But right now I don't need to do that. That is something that we could start looking at, especially if fat loss was stalling or I wasn't seeing the results that I wanted, right? And then Sunday, that again is just a day that I work straight through and I'm just focusing on getting my steps straight that day, right? So again, there's the overall layout. Now what that actually looks like in the training schedule, that's what we'll get onto over here, right? But before I do that, I want to just talk you through something that a lot of people fail to actually think through when they are allocating their training resources to a particular program, right? You have to keep your goals in mind. You have to keep what you're actually training for in mind, right? But we also have to look at what we have recovery capacity for, right? So for me, right now, I have the recovery capacity for about 100 total sets throughout the week, right? Now, maybe you could say, oh, you have a little bit more recovery capacity if you focus on certain other movements or certain muscle groups or whatever. And that's true, right? If I was to only do, say, squats, I might not have the ability to do 100 sets, right? So obviously this is exercise dependent as well. But for me, again, I've worked it out in such a way that I know roughly where I'm at in terms of the amount of sets per week that I can do and still recover, right? So I know what the kind of set goal is per week, right? And then I also need to, when I understand that, I need to allocate that to the muscles that I want to really bring up, to the areas of my body that I really want to bring up, right? Now, my resistance training is less about improving my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu than it is about improving my physique, right? Because as we've discussed in a previous video, like I'm strong enough that I don't really need to get excessively stronger. Like I'm strong enough that, you know, people in the heavier weight classes, I find that they're it's not that hard to deal with them, right? Obviously, look, if you're a heavier individual, like certain positions like mount or whatever, it's always going to be worse for the lighter person, right? But for me, the strength is not an issue. Really, fitness is not really an issue, but it is something I still want to improve. But the muscle mass is the thing that I really want to improve over the next while, right? So for me, my focus is more geared towards improving my muscle mass. And on this fat loss phase, I'm really just setting the foundations for that kind of improvement season, if you will, for that kind of muscle building phase the next 5 years or so. So we are allocating volume, allocating the amount of sets towards muscle groups that are lagging for me, or I just want to bring up in general, right? So for me, calves, look, I literally have no calves, right? Well, I obviously do, but they're just not the size that I want them to be. So for me, I'm allocating a lot of training resources towards calves, right? And for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that really isn't going to improve my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu a huge amount. But for me, it's something that I want to improve, so I'm really focusing on it. So that'll be reflected in my training program. For you, you might have these monster calves and be like, right, well, I don't need to do this much calf training, right? And that might be the case for you. And this is why I'm trying to impress upon you that training has to be specific, right? Like I wouldn't give this program to someone else that's just, oh, I want to improve my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. This would be a terrible program for them, even though that is one of my goals, right? Because we have to take the totality of the goals into consideration, right? Then for quads and hamstrings, I'm basically doing 12 sets per week. And that's split between 6 on the Monday and 6 on the Thursday for quads and hamstrings respectively. So for me, that's a level that I'm like, I can still see some progress, but it's not exactly, you know, really pushing the boat out in terms of being overly demanding on my recovery, right? Now, if I wanted to, say, for example, bring up my quads, which is something that I do want to bring up in future, what I might do is drop down the calf training. Like maybe they get to a sufficient level where I'm like, yeah, okay, they're at a level that I'm happy with. I might go, okay, I'm going to bring the calf training down, the number of sets that I do down. Maybe we'll get down to 16 sets per week. And then I might bring my quad training up to, 18 sets per week, right? So we have to think about allocating volume. You can't just do more and more and more. It just doesn't make sense. Most people just don't have the recovery capacity for that, right? Now, there are a few different things which we'll touch on throughout this video here in terms of some people will change their volume throughout the training block, because this, for me, is about a 4-week long training block, right? Now, some people will start on a lower volume of training in the first week, increase that the second week, increase that the third week, increase that the fourth week, and that works for a lot of people. For me, given the other goals that I have, that's not going to work for me, because that's just going to mean that by that week 4, I'm going to be in a really good place in terms of overreaching with my resistance training, but it's going to mean that my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu later on in that day, a lot of the cases, is going to be impacted because I'm going to have eaten into far more recovery resources as a result of that, right? So we have to take into account, again, the totality of what we're looking to achieve, right? And it's the same again for chest. I put chest and shoulders together. For me, like I'm putting them together. Some people would separate them in terms of, we're going to be very specific in terms of our shoulder training and what's working our chest. Most of the exercises that I'm choosing here, they're basically getting a little bit of everything. So in terms of like the pushing structures, so I'm not too worried about it, right? Same with back. Again, I'm doing about 18 sets for that. My upper body, just the torso stuff, I just want to improve. That's the area that I want to really focus on improve my chest especially, and my back. I just want to get those two areas bigger, right? So they're going to be obviously contributing a lot to my success in terms of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because it's a very upper body intensive activity. But again, that's for me. I'm looking to build muscle. So for me, again, I'm focusing on doing a little bit more volume towards this. And then again, when I am in that calorie surplus, eventually this is going to be something that I really, really do start prioritizing and go, okay, maybe I'll push the sets a little bit higher, right? Now, biceps and triceps, they're getting a good bit of a training stimulus from the actual chest and back training. So I don't need to focus too much on them. However, I do want to get bigger biceps and triceps. So there might come a time where, I'm happy with my chest development, I'm happy with my back development. So for those muscles, I might start doing a little bit less work. I might do a few less sets, and then for the biceps and triceps, I might start doing a little bit more volume, a few more sets, right? So that is something to be aware of. Again, this stuff changes all the time. It's not just like, oh, we're going to be on a set structure. Yeah, we want to ride out that set structure for as long as it's producing the gains that we want. But there's going to come a time where we need to start reallocating volume, how much we're doing towards a certain muscle group, right? And again, I might notice that when I am in a surplus, I'm able to do more total sets, like that's just 100 in total there. Like I might notice, oh, well, because I'm in a calorie surplus and the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu stayed the kind of same because I'm still doing the same classes, the same activity, I might actually have the recovery capacity to start pushing the amount of training volume that I do. Now, I am somewhat constrained in terms of, look, I can't spend 2 to 3 hours in the gym when I'm also doing, whatever Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the evening. I can't be training for 8 hours, and I'm not an athlete. Like I might be doing athletic endeavors, but I'm not a professional athlete. I don't do this for my job. I have a real job, which is, triage, etc. So for me, again, I need to keep all that stuff in mind, and I need to progress my training to a level that I can actually still recover from, right? Now, this is the stuff that people really, really focus a lot on, and it's actually less important than you might think it is, right? So we'll just go through the actual training sessions. We'll go through them quite quickly because we don't need to focus on a huge amount, although there are a lot of lessons to be learned in here, right? So for me, again, as I said, calves, they're just the ones that I want to build. So for me, I'm doing this calf raise machine. There's a calf raise machine in my gym. I'm going to do a standing calf raise. Again, there's a standing calf raise machine in my gym. I'm doing a seated calf raise. There's no seated calf raise. So I'm doing either, depending on where I am, how many reps I'm doing, I'll either do like dumbbell seated calf raises or calf raises in a Smith machine, just seated, And for these, I'm doing higher rep. For me, I'm quite strong with my calves, but they're not, I'm not going to get, they're just going to have to add excessive amounts of weight to the bar to do 8 reps or something, right? Which is fine, but it just takes away from my recovery capacity to do other exercises. So higher reps for me, that's what I'm focused on, at least in this training block. That's something that I've seen success with in terms of my calf development in the last while, right? And the tempo on these, it's just a control tempo. I have it written down there. So it's a 2-second eccentric, 1 second hold in that bottom position, 1 second concentric even, 1 second hold in that top position. And that's what I'm just doing for all of those movements, just so they're very controlled, standardized, right? The rest period doesn't need to be excessively long. That says 2 minutes. That should actually only be 1 minute, but they're basically just 45 seconds to a minute in between each set, right? I'm not taking an excessive amount of time. They recover quite quickly, and I'm still seeing progression in terms of the amount of weight that I'm using over time, right? And for all of these, I'm basically doing them between 1 and 0 reps in reserve, right? So all of those sets, I'm basically going pretty close to failure. I'm not tracking it excessively, going oh, well, did I have 2 reps in reserve of that set there? I'm not tracking it religiously. I just really want to focus on getting a good stimulus through those calves and letting the volume do the work. Well, obviously, you have to do the exercises themselves, and that does the work. Now, the main meat and potatoes, if you will, of the lower body training, this is taken up by my quad exercises and my hamstring exercises. Now, we can't really just separate this stuff because there is a lot of carryover between everything that we're doing. But my first major quad exercise is this reverse banded hack squat. There's a nice hack squat in my gym, and I'm basically just doing 3 sets of 12 on that. And again, nice controlled tempo on the eccentric. There's no pauses at the bottom position or the top position, and then that controlled concentric as well, right? And then I'm taking about 2 minutes rest in between those sets. Now, sometimes I might take 3 minutes. I'm not too religious about sticking to the rest time here, because for me, I'm using this exercise as this kind of main strength builder, if you will. Even though I'm using it in a higher rep range, I'm still looking for that strength progress, right? Now, for me, again, for the reps in reserve that I'm doing for this, basically, again, this is a 4-week program. So for the first week, I'm trying to keep about 3 reps in reserve for all those sets. At least I always gauge it by the last set. I'm going, did I have 3 reps in reserve for that last set, right? And if I did, happy days. The next session that I do this exercise, I'm going to increase that weight. I'm going to try get 2 reps in reserve, right? And then the next week, I'm going to try get 1 rep in reserve. And in that final week, I'm going to try to get to a stage where I'm doing 0 reps in reserve, like I'm pretty much at failure. You know, if you held a gun to my head, maybe I might squeak out another half a rep, but that 4th week is quite intense, right? And then for me, what I'm doing after these 4 weeks, I'll change the training parameters. Generally for me, I'm going to change the rep ranges, but maybe we'll talk about that in a future video in terms of long-term periodization, right? And then again, the next exercise, we've got a single leg back extension. So, you know, people call these hyper extensions, whatever. Basically, I'm trying to do some sort of hip hinging. And for me, I'm doing single leg because I want to improve more of the symmetry between my legs, but also I find a lot of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu activities that I do, you will be required to use one leg. So again, I want to be somewhat sport specific, but also practically speaking, like I'm able to lift quite heavy in a hip hinge. So if I'm doing it with 2 legs, it's a little bit hard to progressively overload this. So for me, I'm just focusing on it in a single leg, right? And again, you don't need to go through it. It's the same kind of setup here in terms of the reps in reserve, etc., right? Then I'm doing some sort of dumbbell lunges. Now, again, I was doing bar lunges, but once you get to a certain weight, it's just very awkward. And you know, in my gym, there's not a great place to do these. So I'm just doing dumbbell lunges, and I'm really just focusing on being controlling that movement throughout the movement, right? And I'm doing 12 reps per leg, which is about 24 reps per set. No, it's not about, it is 24 reps per set, right? And then again, I'm using that same structure of reps in reserve, 3 reps in reserve in the first week, then 2, then 1, then 0, right? So that last week, I'm really pushing it. Now, anyone who's done any kind of lunge knows that it's very cardiovascularly intensive as well, but it's also really effective for the other goals that I have, both in terms of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You do a lot of somewhat like lunge movements, but also in terms of, again, I want to go on hikes over the summer, so I want to be very strong off one leg. And you do find that stuff like lunges or Bulgarian split squats or split squats, they do actually help quite a bit with hiking, right? Now, dumbbell split squat or dumbbell lunges, they do get your glutes into quite a stretched position depending on how you do them, and that can lead some people to be excessively sore from it. I just make sure that my body is upright, so I'm not getting an excessive amount of glute lengthening. So for me, they don't require a huge amount of recovery capacity. Now, if I wanted to really overload the glutes or really feel like the glutes did a lot of work, I could lean forward a little bit more. I could do them in such a way that I get a little bit more glute work done here. But for me, that is not worth the doing it, right? I want to really focus on my quads with these, so I'm staying upright, right? And then I'm doing a seated hamstring curl. And again, same parameters here. We're just doing 3 sets of 12. Finally, then we're finishing up with 15 minutes of cardio, and we're staying in that 130 to 150 beats per minute range, that aerobic cardio, right? So again, nothing too exciting, glamorous, fantastic with this training program. Is very just bare bones. You'd think, oh well, what's the story here? Maybe you could do this and this, but again, I have a certain amount of recovery capacity that I need to think about. Now the cardio, again, I'm just looking to clock up more and more time in that kind of aerobic zone. Ideally, I'd be doing like 30 to 90 minutes in that aerobic zone, because that's when you really start seeing those heart adaptations. But for me, I don't have that time to allocate it on a day-to-day basis. And we also have to take into account that I am doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu later on, so there's a little bit more time during those classes spent in that aerobic zone, right? Now, you could do some sort of anaerobic training at the end of your training sessions, but for me, that impacts on my recovery during throughout the day, and then into that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu later on. Like, we really tap into that glycolysis, we really tap into our glucose stores, and I feel a little bit more drained later on in the day when I'm doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But also, that wouldn't actually really improve my aerobic capacity, which is the main goal, right? So we have to, again, keep the goal, right? Now, we'll move on to our upper body training, which is very similar in terms of the setup, a little bit different though in terms of, I actually should note that I do the calves first, because again, I want to prioritize them. So I'm allocating the actual setup of my training to prioritize the muscles that I want to bring up, right? Because everyone does calves at the end of the training session. They give these lackluster, oh yeah, I'll do a few sets of calves. Sometimes it gets skipped. Oh, whatever, who cares? For me, this is the main goal in terms of my lower body training. So I'm really focusing on them. They're getting my most attention. They're being done when I'm freshest, right? So again, keeping that same mentality, when I'm going into my upper body training sessions, I'm doing my chest and back first, because again, they're the priority, right? Then I'm doing a Smith bench press, right? And this is banded, it's reverse banded, so it's taking a little bit of that overload off at the bottom position. It matches the strength profile a little bit better. I'm not being excessive with the banding, but mainly I'm doing it so when I'm in that kind of stretched bottom position of the bench press, I'm not getting an excessive overload there, which, you know, isn't great for my structure, first of all, but also in terms of my recovery capacity. Then going into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'm already kind of fatigued through the shoulders, whereas if I don't do that and I band it, it's a little bit easier, right? Chin-ups, again, maybe if you're saying, oh, I really want to progress, like in terms of just pure hypertrophy, you'd go chin-ups are not going to be the most effective for this, because most people tend to, you know, extend their spine, and as a result of that, you're not really getting the best lat activation. But I like chin-ups. I just enjoy doing them. They're something that I'm kind of good at, so I want to keep progressing those, right? So again, I'm just doing 3 sets of 12 reps, and, you know, I'm usually adding on whatever, like 10 kilos, 20 kilos around my waist for those, right? Again, obviously depending on how much I weigh as well. And again, same structure again. We're doing the first week, 3 reps in reserve, then 2, then 1, then 0, right? The next exercise then we're moving on to is dips. Now, we could argue that this is probably not the most effective exercise for anything, but I do find it is quite a good carryover in terms of some of the movements that you do in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And then also I like to have some exercises that use the shoulder girdle, especially pushing exercises, in a more, we'll call it holistic way, in terms of there's actual free movement at the shoulder. Like in a bench press, like your shoulders are pinned back, your shoulders are fixed in position, or at least they're largely fixed in position. So I like having movements that are still pressing exercises, but I have to actually stabilize at the shoulder myself, which again potentially has that carryover effect into my sport, right? And then I'm doing some sort of wide seated machine row. And again, this is more towards getting some upper back activity and upper lat activity, but also some rear delta as well. Now, again, you could argue that you're not getting a huge stimulus in terms of that upper back musculature, and you'd be better off doing some sort of, I don't know, just seated row in general and just really focusing on the lats. But for me, I do find I get some nice therapeutic effect from doing this. I feel like my shoulders feel better, right? Then I'm moving on to a Pec Deck, and this is pure just like get blood into the muscle, really focus on the contraction. Again, I'm doing about 20 reps with this. You know, I'm not really focusing on how many reps in reserve. I'm just focusing on getting the 20 reps and then slowly progressing that weight over time. And then I move on to reverse Pec Deck. Now, reverse Pec Deck, it's not a fantastic exercise. Most of them are not set up to really effectively match how most people are in terms of their strength profile, but look, it's just straight into them back to back. It's very easy to do in terms of my overall structure. Then we're moving on to the the triceps and biceps. We're doing some dumbbell skull crushers, and then we're doing some alternating dumbbell curls. And the reason I'm doing alternating dumbbell curls, I don't think there's anything magic about them. I just want to actually get a bit more grip work in the training session. So you're actually holding dumbbells for a little bit longer doing it this way, right? And again, we're doing about 20 reps per arm on the alternating ones, and then 20 reps on the dumbbell skull crushers. Now, if I wanted to really save time, I could superset the 2 of those, but I don't. I do it within the hour that I have allotted to this. I get it done, and then I get my 15 minutes of cardio done after that, right? Then again, the Wednesday would be a day off. Then we're back into a lower body training session, very similar setup, just different exercise selection. So again, we've got the calf exercises, they're the same. There's no need to change things up, just keep the same exercises. We've got a reverse banded Smith squat, right? So I am doing this because, again, I want to have some free movement, some stability. I want to have, I actually have to stabilize things myself, whereas on a hack squat, you don't have to as much, which is fine. But I know if I do the back squat, there's just too much lower back overload for me, especially if it isn't reverse banded. So for me, I'm doing a reverse banded Smith squat. It just keeps everything nice and stable. It keeps me in the right plane of motion that I want to be in, and I can just feel my quads working effectively in this. Whereas if I do an actual squat, I feel just my glutes working and my low back, right? So for me, this is a nice exercise to do. For you, it might be a terrible exercise. Again, this is the thing about picking exercises. It is very individualized, right? Then I'm doing a staggered RDL. So I brought my RDLs up to 240 kilos with 100 kilo of band tension, resisting me at the top. So for me, doing RDLs, it's not a huge bang for your buck exercise, because it just leads to a severe amount of recovery demand, right? Because I'm just very good at that kind of hip hinging pattern. So for me, I'm trying to offset that somewhat by still getting that hip hinging pattern in, but I'm doing it in a more single leg variation. Now, I don't like single leg RDLs where you bring the back leg up and you kind of really have to stabilize. That can be fine as a somewhat of a rehab or a prehab exercise, but when we're really trying to load it, you're better off just doing some sort of like B stance or staggered stance and really just overloading as a result of that, you know? And you do still get both legs, I suppose, working, the posterior chain on both sides. It's all still working, even if you do have the legs staggered. Some people often think that it's just the more straightened leg that's doing the work, but the other leg is still providing a role, is still doing a lot in the exercise, right? And that should also say actually, oh no, that's fine, yeah. Then we're just going into bar split squats. Again, I was doing dumbbell split squats, but I've maxed out the dumbbells in my gym, so I'm just moving on to bar split squats. Now, I could do Smith machine, you know, I could change up the order of these and just get on the Smith machine, but there's only, I think, 2 Smith machines in my gym, so when I use one, I don't want to have to go back to one, right? So I already have the bar because I'm doing bar RDLs, so I just put the bar back on the rack and then I go straight into the bar split squats. And this is also something that you have to take into account when you're designing a training program. Your training program is going to be harder if you make it harder by virtue of having to go back to different equipment or having to go to this side of the gym and up the stairs and then over here and all over the place. Whereas if you can just cluster things together, it does actually make things a lot easier because it's more practical. And if it's, you know, if you lower that difficulty barrier, obviously it becomes a lot easier to actually stick to this stuff, right? And then we're moving into line hamstring curls. Again, nothing fancy here, we're just doing some hamstring work, right? And again, doing the cardio then finally on the last day, well, I still have cardio training on the last day, but we're moving into the upper body day, a high incline Smith press. And again, that's banded, I didn't write it here, but basically I'm trying to get a little bit more upper chest, a little bit more of that anterior delta as well. Again, same parameters. Then we're doing a pull-up. Again, I just like pull-ups. You could argue that a lat pull-down would be more effective, but I just like pull-ups, right? Then we got onto the chest press machine, and again, I'm focusing a lot on the contraction with this. It's a converging chest press, so I'm really able to get a nice resistance profile with this. Then we're on to a seated row. Again, we're focusing more on the lats here because in the first exercise, that pull-ups, the elbows are out to the sides a bit more, and with this seated row, the elbows are really tight to the sides, so we're getting a little bit more of that, we'll call it lower lat, if you will, right? Then we're going into some sort of dumbbell laterals. Again, I'm just really focusing on driving blood into the muscle, really just focusing on the contraction. I'm not focused on like, oh, I want to really progressively overload these, because what am I going to do, like 20 kilo dumbbell laterals? It's just, you know, it's just not going to happen, right? And then we've got some sort of cable upright row. Now, some people find cable upright rows really, you know, mess with their shoulders. I'm doing this a bit more like a kind of upper back exercise. You know, obviously it's still working the shoulders, but I'm doing a little bit more for my upper back, the traps. It is a position that you actually do a lot, or a movement I should say, you actually do a lot in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where you'd be breaking someone's grips, so you'd pull back in that kind of upright row manner. So again, I want to strengthen that up and, you know, build muscle there. I want to have like big traps as well, you know. And then we're doing a rope press down. Again, we're thinking about, oh, well, I'm already at the cable station, I can just move on to another cable exercise. So I'm doing a rope press down, really focusing on pulling those rope attachments apart. And then we're finally going into a machine bicep curl. Most machine bicep curls are not great in terms of the setup, and most people really butcher them. But the one in my gym, yeah, it's quite nice for my structure at least. Then again, we're doing cardio. And then the final day, we're on to cardio. We're just doing 60 to 90 minutes of cardio in that kind of 130 to 150 beats per minute range, right? And for me, again, I have those cardiovascular goals in terms of improving the aerobic fitness, but also in terms of I want to be fit for being in the mountains, for hiking. So for me, I'm doing specific activities. I'm doing like the stepper, like the stair mill. Now, it's not perfect. Ideally, the best would be to go for a hike this day, but I live in London. There's not exactly a lot of mountains around here, right? So I'm doing 30 minutes on the stair mill, and then I'm moving on to incline walking, or I'll go for a jog, and again, I might do that for 30 minutes, and then I might move on to something else for the last 30 minutes. Now, you could argue that it would be better to just do the same thing across the board, but I know a lot of gyms these days, they have like 30-minute sets or set point on the cardio machines, so that people aren't just staying on them for hours, which is fair enough. And then also I get quite bored. I have ADHD, so I get quite bored if I'm just doing the same activity over and over and over and over again, right? So anyway, that's the training program for now. And again, I hope you got something from that. I know the video is quite long, but there's a lot in it, right? But again, the main thing I want you to take away from this is there is a lot that goes into designing a training program, right? And we haven't even talked about like long-term periodization. When we're just actually setting down and setting up the program, you actually have to think about a lot. You could just go, oh yeah, I'm just going to do a few different exercises, blah, 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 and just lash something together or find something online. But it's not going to be specific to your goals. Now, I could go into every single exercise decision that I've made here. I could be like, right, this is exactly why I've chosen this exercise versus all of the other exercises that I could potentially change or could potentially choose, right? And that's something that you have to be able to do if you're designing your own training program, and especially if you're designing someone else's training program. A lot of the time you will find training programs, they basically just have like 6 different exercises for the same muscle group, the same exact movement pattern. People will go from, oh, I do a barbell bench press into a dumbbell bench press into a chest press into a cable machine press, and it's like you're basically working the exact same pattern. Yeah, there are some differences, and that might be an effective workout for a given goal, for a given individual, but if that's the only way you know how to train, it's probably not the most effective way of organizing your training. And you see this all the time, right? Anyway, I'm going to leave you there so you don't have to watch any more of me. If you do like, share, subscribe, do all that fun stuff on the video, it really does help the channel. It really does help what we're trying to do. And ultimately, I hope you got some benefit from this video. Anyway, peace out. We'll see you in the next one.